The Capital Confidential podcast is brought to you by the Times-Union, the leading newspaper in New York's capital region. Subscribe today or visit online at timesunion.com.
You want to deport an undocumented person? Start with me, because I'm an undocumented person.
How do we beat him in an election?
We will. I'm going to run against him.
I wish you would. I wish you would, Dad. I would.
There are things in here that are unobjectionable because they're not that effective. So yeah, sure, I'll vote for a distinctive license plate. Sure, why not?
Jim, you had your press conference at 4 o'clock.
You're having a press conference now?
That's
You're
right.
talking?
I'm having a press conference.
Well,
now.
is this your space here or is it public?
No, it's my space.
Oh, this is your
Don't
space.
interrupt.
Okay.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is the Capital Confidential podcast. This timely episode is a look back at the events, 12 years ago, that elevated Tom DiNapoli to the post of state comptroller. I joined him in his Albany office for a trip down memory lane that explored an aborted bid for lieutenant governor, then Governor Eliot Spitzer's role in the comptroller appointment process, and the controversy of his selection. And if you're looking for more Lombardo and DiNapoli banter, check out the interview I recorded with him for New York Now, which focuses on the recently adopted state budget. Enjoy the show. Before being appointed comptroller, you flirted with another statewide office. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly enjoyed my time in the legislature, but I did feel like I wanted to do something else.
20 years at this time.
Yeah. Control was 2007, but in 2005, I guess, I started thinking about running for lieutenant governor. Mm-hmm. And so started to travel the state, started to talk to some leaders, set up a committee, got bumper stickers printed up. There's still a few of those floating around somewhere.
That's a special
Tom
commemorative.
DiNapoli for, put on eBay one day and see if anybody's even interested. But
I think the LCA would gobble those up.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Now that Lovett's gone, I don't know.
I think me and Vielkind are geeky. We'd appreciate it.
But what I did do, Eliot Spitzer was clearly the favorite to be the nominee, and I was supporting Eliot, and I met with him. And I said that my view was that, the governor candidate should pick the lieutenant governor. So he gave me the green light to set up a committee and play it out. But and then he called me to tell me that David Patterson was going to be his choice. And I indicated to him that, obviously I'm fine with that. That's his choice. I know David well. And so I remember he actually called me on, it was a Monday morning. I was about to leave Long Island to go to Albany for session. And, I drove up because I was really just on the verge of really launching into a full-fledged effort for this, including a primary if need be. And I marched right into David Patterson's office. He was the Senate Minority Leader then. And I said, David, I want you to know I support you. You're Eliot's choice. I'm on board 100%. And so ended my brief foray into statewide politics. So I thought. And then, of course, everything started to happen with Alan Hevesy, and look where we ended up.
Well, right. So in the wake of Comptroller Hevesy resigning, being booted from office, you threw your hat in the ring for the comptroller post, and you were one of 17 applicants, including 6 legislators. So what was it about the job that was appealing to you? Were you motivated solely by the vacancy, or was it a post you had considered in the wake of dropping the LG bid?
Well, I certainly hadn't. I don't think. No one anticipated that Alan was going to have the problems that he had.
Right.
So I hadn't thought about it. I mean, from my perspective, there are 4 statewide offices. Attorney General. I assume, I don't even know if it's required, but obviously it's a lawyer. Whether that's technically required
Probably
or not, it's a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Going from the state assembly to governor seemed like kind of a stretch. So it left 2 other offices, lieutenant governor, which I thought, given my legislative experience, made the most sense. But controller, contrary, some people think you have to be, a Wall Street person or an accountant or, and the answer is no. In fact, you look at people who've been the controller, they tend to be political people. Right. It's a political office. So certainly I view the controller as a possibility, but because there was an incumbent and a popular incumbent who seemed to be doing a good job, I never never thought about it. So when suddenly it seemed that Alan was having troubles that were going to result in a vacancy, a couple people came to me and said, you should really consider, throwing your hat in the ring to be considered for that. And I gave it some thought, and I said, you know what, I had already kind of made the psychological leap when I decided to run for lieutenant governor that it was time to move on from the legislature. So it wasn't much of a stretch after that to say, yeah, why shouldn't I be considered for controller?
And ultimately, a panel was convened to make recommendations for the legislature to consider. What was your approach to this process? How did you decide to put your best foot forward?
It was interesting. When I served in the legislature, there were two occasions where there were vacancies for one for controller, one for attorney general. And under the state constitution, those two positions are filled by a joint session of the legislature. So when Bob Abrams resigned, Oliver Coppell was in the Assembly, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and we appointed him Attorney General. And when Ned Regan resigned to take a job in the private sector, Carl McCall was appointed controller. So in both of those cases, the candidates made the rounds, talked to the members. I actually don't recall if there was a formal interview process. There probably was an interview of some kind. But fast forward to 2007, and we did it very differently. Elliott was just starting out as governor with very strong opinions on a lot of things. And so we came up with this process to have a panel interview the candidates, with the legislators doing the interviewing as well. In fact, and I approached it in the spirit that it was put forth. So I sat for an interview. I think I had the longest interview of anybody. I think my interview was like 2 hours. But it was interesting because the panel didn't ask any questions. The legislators asked all the questions. And the panel was supposed to come up with 5 names, to recommend, and the legislature would choose from a list of 5. Well, it was a very strange turn of events. The panel came up with 3 names, not 5. And while
no legislators.
And no legislators. Even though they were not speaking for myself, but they were a number of legislators who were very strong candidates to be considered. And no legislators were on this. So it seemed a little fishy, if I could use that non-political term, that the governor's, at the time, his interest in having no legislator seemed to be reflected in the list. And because it was an impartial list, many felt that it lacked credibility. So there was a sense, certainly in the Assembly, that we should proceed to have our choice be reflected in the final selection for the controller position. Fortunately for me, I had the largest block of support within the Democratic Assembly.
Yeah, how were you able to garner that support?
Well, kind of the old-fashioned way. I mean, I
kissing babies and making the rounds?
Well, not quite kissing babies, but making rounds, very much so. Calling people up, meeting with people.
Okay.
And the people were, the members of the legislature, whatever the number was, then 212, I guess. I'd been there for, a number of years. I came from a part of the state which back then had a lot of Republicans in Assembly and Senate positions. And what became pretty clear is not only did I have a great deal of support within the Democratic Conference of the Assembly, I had some pretty significant Republican support.
Yeah, what was that about? You did better amongst Senate Republicans than you did Senate Democrats.
Senate Democrats as a bloc voted against me. Yeah. Because the Senate Democrats made the political calculation at the time that they were going to throw in with the governor. And so that was very much a Spitzer Senate Democratic alliance. Whereas the Assembly Democrats felt we should. There were two Assembly Democrats that didn't vote for me, but the other 100 and whatever it was. But I needed other votes. So probably about half of the Senate Republicans, about half of the Assembly Republicans voted for me. So in the end, the vote was like 150 to 50, something like that. It was an overwhelming vote. It was bipartisan, and that was a very contentious vote. I mean, people forget how strong and how popular Eliot Spitzer was in January and February of 2007. And as you know, when you check the stories, there was a lot of negativity from editorial boards. There was the governor went into the districts of a couple of my colleagues to attack them.
Seems to have backfired.
Well, it backfired, but it put a lot of pressure on me to make sure I was going to do the job right.
Couldn't phone it in.
Couldn't phone it in.
It'd be like 4 years. This is great.
Yeah,
I'm in.
right? Oh.
I don't have to campaign for 2 more years. This is gonna be great.
Sometimes I wonder how I got through the first month, let alone the first, three years.
Well, you mentioned that 2 of your Assembly Democratic colleagues broke ranks and didn't back you. One was Paul Tonko, who at the time was vying for a job with NYSERDA, wanted to get appointed. And then the other one, though, is Joan Millman. And I don't know, what was the rationale for Joan?
Well, first, I always say they're both good friends, to this day. And Joan, the other candidate, who was Martha Stark, came from Joan's district.
Okay.
She was a constituent. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, so it wasn't personal.
Yeah, no.
She probably thought you'd do a great job, but gotcha.
Joan continues to be a very good friend, and Paul Tonko is one of our best members of Congress and a very, very good friend.
So you sort of just mentioned that first month, tough, you had a lot of expectations coming in, but at the same time, you also had some serious threats, against you. I remember reading about a note being mailed to your office, had white powder in it. That ended up being nothing, but there was also a threat that you would get the quote-unquote Huey Long treatment, right, with the author saying, I was a marksman in the Army, 2 shots, that's all, and also saying that Sheldon Silver would be one of his targets. What was it like to get threats like that?
Well, it was concerning. It was probably more concerning for my family than it was for me because the press reported on this. And, it was an odd beginning for me because, remember, Alan had to resign because of his use of cars. Mm-hmm. He went to prison eventually because of the pension fund issue, but his resignation had to do with using. So I wasn't using any cars. So I would walk, from the university club to the office. If someone really wanted to do something, they would have ample opportunity. So that then required a reevaluation of security. Look, it was. I look back on it now as it was just part of the craziness. Unfortunately, Elliot just ramped up the rhetoric and the vitriol in a way that created a very negative atmosphere for me. And we just had to ride it out. In the end, Elliot and I established a good working relationship, but the first 3 or 4 weeks was very contentious, and the press, I have to say, by and large, was very negative, and that also ramped it up. And so, people had this expectation like I was incompetent, incapable of doing the job, and that this terrible ill had been inflicted on the state of New York by me becoming controller. So I had to prove that the critics were wrong, and we did do that. Of course, shortly thereafter, we realized that there was an ongoing investigation of the office related to pension fund abuse, which then ended up being a multi-year, in-depth scrutiny of the office, resulting in, Alan going to prison, and the chief investment officer also facing very serious charges. So we're trying to manage the office through that investigation and all the bad headlines that came out with that, even though it was stuff that happened before I got here. And then, of course, shortly after I became controller, the Great Recession hit. The Wall Street markets collapsed. The pension fund lost 26% value in 1 year. It was like, could there be any more plagues inflicted on me than what we're facing?
Going back to the threat that you received, you mentioned how the rhetoric might have been amped up by the governor at the time. Did he reach out to you or anything after you got the threat?
Yes.
What did he say?
Well, actually, that's actually what prompted the reconciliation, I guess, if I can call it that, because I think everybody realized, including the governor, that it had all gone too far. You could disagree about who should be the controller, but to keep this fevered attack really made no sense. So he called me and he said, come over, meet at his office. And basically at that point we made peace, and he told me I better make sure I have security. And from there on, we actually had a very good working relationship. Elliot was is a very smart and hard-charging kind of personality. Probably to this day he would not necessarily say that he would have felt differently, but when you look at how a lot of things that happened with how he handled his governorship, I think given him, I mean, he won with, what was it, close to 70% of the vote. He had an
pretty well.
incredible mandate.
Yeah.
And within a year, it was all gone. So, I'm sure there are a few things he would do differently. I'd like to think that handling the comptroller appointment would have been one of them.
How do you think he would have done as a comptroller in New York City if he had gotten elected to that?
Well, he really did want that,
Yeah.
I was glad he didn't want to run for state controller because that would have been, a strange turn of events. And he came very close. I think he always felt that the job had great potential for state controller or city controller, and I think given his work as Attorney General in terms of holding corporations accountable, I think his emphasis would have been on, that shareholder activist kind of role, and we do that. But I think the problem he had is that he just, because of everything, all the other stuff, he just didn't have enough credibility with enough people for them to vote for him again.
You mentioned the press criticism, the criticisms from basically everybody at the time. So how sweet has every single election victory been since then? I mean, do you just fist pump all night long when you're getting 60% of the vote?
No,
I showed them.
No, I'm not. That's just not my personality.
They must be sweet though. I mean, it's gotta.
It's look, when I was getting all the criticism, a lot of folks from back home on Long Island reached out to me. People who knew me for not just years, for decades, and said, Tom, we've always believed in you. Continue to believe in yourself. So I always had kind of that inner strength and that sense of support from people who knew me best. So I do look back sometimes and say, how did I weather the storm? But at the end of the day, it's a great job, which I love doing, and we have a great team. And when we've done so well in the elections, leading the state ticket, both in 2014, 2018, it's just more the kind of validation that anybody would want. But I don't over celebrate it. I mean, I think that having public support is always very fragile, especially for this office. A lot of people aren't sure what we do, and my name might not be as well known as other names. But when it all comes together, in an election, and when most of the editorials, as opposed to the way it was years ago, were all supporting me, it makes you feel you're on the right track, and that's all the satisfaction I'm looking for.
So 12 years later, looking back on that appointment process, as well as this past appointment process of Barbara Underwood to fill the Attorney General post, what do you think of the way the Constitution lays out the appointment process? Do you think that's the right way to go? Should we be filling it with special elections like some people proposed? What are your thoughts?
I think ultimately the special election makes more sense, especially in my case. I mean, keep in mind, Alan resigned before he was sworn in, and I was appointed February 7th, so I had 3 years and 10 months and 3 weeks of a term. That's a long time.
I'll round it up to 4 years.
Yeah, I pretty much had a full term by appointment. So I would think it's smarter to fill it by special election. Now, I think the only concern is, if you have a special election in the middle of March, is anybody going to vote, and does that make sense? So I would probably argue that you could do an appointment until the next general election, and then put it on the ballot when there's a general election. Would be my perspective on how to do it.
So your campaign recently, I think, created itself as 2022 DiNapoli. Yeah. Does that mean another run in the works for 4 more years?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where I'm sitting today, I love the job. We don't have term limits in New York. Tend not to be a believer in term limits anyway. And certainly if I want to be seriously considered for next time, unfortunately, the way we do things, you have to start raising money right away. So I did file a committee for re-election for controller for 2022. And we'll start doing our fundraising. I'm hoping that public financing will come in the meantime, with that commission that was set up as part of the budget. That would make my life a lot easier and less time, fundraising. So there's another year or so before we'll know for sure about that. But in the meantime, we set up a committee and the plan is to run again.
Were you shocked? Well, at this point, I'm still holding out hopes that they come back with a recommendation that says the public financing will only apply to the commissioner, the comptroller's race.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go.
Yeah,
Let's just do a test run.
Thanks. But even if they did that, if they did it with enough of a lead time, I would do it. The problem last time is there was no lead time. We couldn't do it.
No.
That was a gift. That was a booby prize. That wasn't even a gift.
I think that's probably correct.
Well, because it was meant A, meant to say we did something when they didn't, and B, meant to fail. So
Yeah.
and that's what happened.
Well, Comptroller, thank you so much for doing this walk down memory lane. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, most of it was a good memory, a little bit cringeworthy, but not too bad.
Well, I think that just makes for a well-rounded story.
Thanks, Dave.
And that's our show. My thanks to Comptroller Tom DiNapoli for sitting down with me, not once, but twice to record this interview, as my technology completely failed me on the first try. And don't forget to check out my interview with the Comptroller on New York Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please spread the word about the podcast. It helps other people discover the show and makes great cocktail chatter. Until next time, podcast adjourned.
Just heard I tried to get you.
Ah! This day sucks!